Howdy, y'alls. It's me, Dr. E, here to help you out with Module 4 this week. So, this week we really start looking in on culture change, cultural relativism, and ethnocentrism. All right, those are kind of the key topics. So I'm going to spend a little time going over those key concepts, and then I want to spend a little time talking about your assignments this week. So, let me dive right on into the concept of culture. Now, you've been doing your reading, so you should already have a good understanding of this, but I want to point out that, a little story from my own undergraduate days. My first anthro class, cultural anthro class, our professor asked us all to define culture. And we all sat there and tried to define it as best we could. And, we all had a lot of common ground between our definitions, right? Things like, culture is shared, learned, symbolic, is associated with behavior. Yeah. But my professor, who happened to be my major advisor, she let us know that you could ask 100 anthropologists to define culture, and you'd get 100 different definitions. All right. So, while the concept of culture is well accepted, people may define it slightly differently. However, in their definitions, they will highlight key aspects, such as culture is shared, culture is learned, culture is symbolic, culture involves behavior. All right. So that's a basic breakdown. Now, let me bring up another key concept: enculturation. All right. This is the process by which you acquire culture. All right. And it starts in infancy. Doesn't matter if you're, born, how to say it, doesn't matter if you're adopted or not, okay? Starting as an infant, you start absorbing culture, all right? The culture that you are within, all right? It's often referred to as your birth culture. Now, for those that are adopted and may come from another culture, their adoptive families, all right, end up providing them enculturation, right? So they may actually start enculturation in one culture, but once they are adopted into another culture, then it continues within that other culture. Now, I want to make it clear that enculturation isn't a conscious thing, okay? Particularly when you're an infant, okay? Your brain hasn't developed quite yet. But enculturation goes on for a long period of time, right? It's not just when you're an infant, right? So at a certain point, things become conscious, right? Some examples of unconscious culture that is learned is language. Okay, you also start learning acceptable behaviors and where they're acceptable, where they're not, right? And we always need to keep in mind that enculturation is not biological. There is no genetic basis to it, okay? It is not innate. It is learned, okay? That is the key point. Culture is learned. You're not born with it, right? And you acquire culture through the process of enculturation, okay? Now on to some other concepts. Here's a key term: acculturation, not to be confused with enculturation, okay? Enculturation, E-N, right? Acculturation, A-C. Now, acculturation is the process of learning a new culture, right? So you are born and raised within a particular culture, but hey, you may move to another culture. That happened to me. And when you move to that culture, you go through another unique process that we call acculturation, and that is acquiring cultural values of another group. All right. If you move to a foreign country, you'd probably have to learn another language, different ways of interacting with people, new cultural norms and values and practices, things like that. I've gone through this several times with all the different places that I've lived and worked overseas. Now, there's a third concept, not to be confused with any of the previous concepts, and this is called assimilation. Now, there are two types of assimilation. There's voluntary and forced or coerced. Now, voluntary assimilation is when you willfully, all right, adopt a new culture and replace your own with it. Okay. For example, if immigrants are a great group to look at, say immigrants coming to the U.S., they may come, say, from Thailand, just using it as an example. And so they might speak Thai. But if they stop speaking Thai, right, and adopt English as their primary language, right, here in the U.S., as well as other cultural values and norms, right, key is that they're doing it voluntarily. It's their choice, right? That is what we call voluntary assimilation. Now, forced assimilation is quite different. You have no choice. You are forced to assimilate to another culture. This is often, a great example of this is seen in colonization. All right, France and Britain colonized the majority of Africa, right, and other parts of the world, but just using Africa for an example right here. Now, the groups that they colonized were forcefully assimilated to new cultural norms and values and practices, right? They were often forced to stop speaking their native language, right? Forced to speak English or French, the colonial language, right? And adopt colonial values and practices. All right. Key is it is forced or coerced. They do not have a choice in it. And this really reflects power dynamics, right, between the colonizer and the colonized. Now, that's where I'll leave that. I have a nice, some extra resources in the written portion of my announcement that you can check out about U.S. federal acts and assimilation of Native Americans. I have a nice PDF about colonialism in there. Also have a preview of a great documentary. It's not the whole documentary, just a trailer for it. I think it's like 5-6 minutes. Okay, and it's about King Leopold, who colonized the Congo. King Leopold II, who colonized the Congo. Definitely check it out. Heads up, the face of colonialism, colonization is pretty ugly, okay? But definitely worth a look. It gives you some more insights into the topic. Moving on here, we've got two more concepts I want to touch on. One is ethnocentrism, and the other is cultural relativism. Let's start with ethnocentrism. Now, through the process of enculturation, right, we're all taught that our culture is good, normal, moral, right, correct. It is natural, right, not biologically speaking, but through the process of enculturation, you are taught that, right? You are taught that the way you do things is the appropriate way. Okay. Now, what happens because of this is we often, when faced with other people, other practices, other values, might have a strong reaction. Okay, and that is because we are using our own cultural values to assess other people's and their ways. Okay, and this is, as I said, it's natural, right? Ethnocentrism is a very natural reaction, but it means that we have to be really careful about applying our own individual cultural standards to try to understand the ways of others. Right? It just doesn't work. Okay? Because there are standards of how to do things, not theirs. Now, anthropologists use a very specific concept called cultural relativism to try to address this. In cultural relativism, it actually has its roots in Franz Boas's work. He came up with this idea of historical particularism, which means that in order to understand a group of people, you actually have to start with their unique and specific history in their place. Now, cultural relativism is really just an expansion of that. It's modern, modern construction. And it outlines that all cultures are different and unique unto themselves and cannot be measured by foreign standards. All right? So anthropologists try to put themselves in the shoes of the people that they're studying, working with, trying to understand. Okay? Now, it's a great concept, right? And it's extremely valuable. However, there are some issues. For example, everyone is going to have a fine line where they draw an end to their cultural relativism. Right? Like, can you look at Hitler and Nazis and the Holocaust in a culturally relativistic perspective? I can't just say that it's their culture, right, and leave it at that. No, he violated human rights, right? He exterminated millions of people. No, that crosses a line for me, right? So I stop being culturally relativistic there, okay? And you're going to be faced with lots of examples, case studies, things like that, in your work as in anthropology that are going to challenge your cultural relativity. Okay? Now, I have some great resources to help you kind of explore this more in the written portion of my announcement. I have a link to the American Anthropological Association's statement on ethics, right? These are the standards by which we must work. And you'll see in them that cultural relativism is really kind of a central concept. Now, I also have another resource, the American Anthropological Association, AAA, Ethics Handbook, and I have a link to some case studies and their solutions. Now, each of these case studies really kind of highlights ethnocentrism and cultural relativism, right? And how, and I stress, these are real case studies, right? And the cool thing is they actually, they present the case study, right? So you get a basic understanding of what happened. And then, right, they have a second entry where you can actually see what the anthropologist did, okay? And you'll see that, some of the cases, they're walking a fine line. Or you may actually see, oh, no, they're not practicing cultural relativism, right? So yeah, definitely worth checking out. It's going to help you better understand the concepts. All right, moving on. A note on objectivity. Try to make this quick. To put it simply, from an anthropological perspective, particularly a cultural anthropological perspective, objectivity is a myth, okay? And this is really illustrated through one simple phrase. All observation is positioned from somewhere. This means that the observer, right, is going to have their own colored lenses, right? Their culture, right, is going to influence how they see and understand things, which means that a person cannot be completely objective. That's what it really comes down to. Right? So it's something, this connects back to ethnocentrism and cultural relativism as well, right? Because those things influence how we see and understand things, right? So always keep in mind that no matter who you are, what you're seeing, what you're doing, it's culturally influenced, right? You just can't get away from it. Moving on, I got some nice little resources about Franz Boas, the father of American anthropology. Definitely check them out. One's a nice little bio that reviews, his contributions, his history, stuff like that, and the other is a funny little video that talks about some of his major contributions. All right, that kind of covers the main concepts for this week. Now I want to spend a little time talking about your assignments. First up, you have your discussion about cultural relativism. All right. So make sure you do the reading, right? And you're going to want to make use of the extra resources in Module 4 that are associated with this discussion, right? And they're clearly identified. Let's see here. You have some about female genital cutting, culturally sanctioned murder, infanticide, arranged marriage, gender hierarchy, discrimination, equality. And now I really recommend that you make use of the extra resources that I've included. Things like the AAA statement on ethics and the case studies. These are going to help you better respond to the prompt. All right, and of course, be sure to cite any and all sources that you draw on, in-text citation and full APA citation reference at the end. And I'll have some more about that discussion in the discussion board. I'll have an initial thoughts post to help further orient you. Moving on, you have your final project Part A submission, your interview. Okay, now you submitted a draft of that, and I gave you detailed feedback on it. Right, so what you need to do for this submission is apply all the feedback that I gave you and submit it. All right, pretty straightforward. I do want to stress, use clear and concrete examples, and of course, cite all your sources. All right, APA style citation, in text and full reference. Now, something I've included to help you out with this is, in the written portion of my announcement, I have a sample paper, right? A sample example of this final project Part A submission. Okay, so definitely check that out. All right, it's there for you to use as an example to emulate. All right, so don't skip it. Definitely give it attention. And of course, sorry, I forgot to mention this. Your discussion, for the discussion, I'm backing up a little. Initial posts are due by the end of Thursday, and at least 2 response posts to your fellow classmates are due by the end of Sunday. For your final project Part A, it needs to be submitted by the end of Sunday this week. Now, I think that's where I'll leave this. And of course, if you have any questions, concerns, anything like that at all, right, don't you hesitate to get a hold of me, right? I'm at your service, no matter what it is. Okay. You guys have a great one, and I'll see you in the discussion boards. Take care.